morning. I've got a fake enthusiasm till about 11 a.m., but here I am. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm really grateful to be here speaking with all of you. I have been the director of Soulardarity since its co-founding in 2011. What I'm here to talk about today mostly is the overall theme of power. I grew up on 11th Street and 5th Avenue in New York City. The community I come from generally went to private high schools and wasn't overall worried about getting shot by the police. It's a community with a terrific amount of social advantage, but also, as it's been mentioned, this profound feeling of powerlessness regardless. I've talked about this feeling with community organizers and trust fund kids and elected officials, and many of you probably relate to it. It's that feeling of being aware of the enormity of the problems we are trying to solve and the smallness of our own individual ability to address them alone. And there's a very painful and difficult distance between those things. Today, what I'm going to talk about is one of the enormous tasks in front of us, which is transforming our entire national energy system. I have a short time up here, so this will necessarily involve some broad strokes and be more about posing some complicated problems than providing very simple solutions, because those problems are most of what we have to work on. I don't have an easy series of steps in order to achieve the change we need to see, but I hope that talking about the work we're doing in Highland Park can serve as an inspiration or a waypoint to help you figure out direction in your own work. And I'm going to start by giving context on Highland Park. So Highland Park is a 3-square-mile city in the center of Detroit, one of 2 little company towns incorporated by big car companies in the early 20th century. Highland Park is a model community in many ways for what the fossil fuel economy can accomplish. Its growth was fueled by Ford's Model T assembly line, the first in the world, later the world headquarters of Chrysler and other manufacturing giants. It is home to the first mile of paved road, the first depressed urban freeway, a municipal water plant, and free 2-year college for its young people in its heyday. And the city also had a profound impact on our national infrastructure. Highland Park in many ways is ground zero for the transition to a car-centric economy. The dismantling of public transit, the destruction of black business communities for the construction of highways, the overall suburbanization and sprawl of our current society, a lot of this started in Highland Park by folks that weren't anticipating any of it. In the present day, Highland Park is much like its surrounding Detroit. The factory buildings are mostly empty, poverty and unemployment are high, and the stacked impacts of decades of systematic racism have left a majority black population with very limited opportunities. And what I want to say quickly is that I am not telling the whole story of Highland Park. There is a beautiful, deep history of culture and struggle in the city that I'm not talking about. For the sake of time. I'm mostly just giving a sense of some of the big economic forces that have rocked it. In 2011, as was previously mentioned, Highland Park had over 1,000 of its streetlights repossessed by DTE Energy to address $4 million of electric debt. And when this happened, you had a population of people already impacted by lots of systemic issues, having to watch contractors come through their streets and literally take the street poles out. In the matter of months, all the residential neighborhoods of this city went dark. And that's the point at which Soulardarity organized to install the first solar-powered streetlight in Highland Park, just a block south of the old Model T plant, and launched our mission of community-owned solar. And the intention here is to get at the root causes of why this repossession happened. We're using off-grid solar because it is resilient to grid failure, because the costs are predictable and low, and doing community ownership because underlying this is a real problem of decision-making power. The fact that residents don't have a voice in the decisions that impact their lives. This is an overall theme in our entire energy economy, and that is why we are setting up these streetlights to be planned and owned by the Highland Park community. But in order to understand how this decision-making power ever got so concentrated in the first place, we have to ask a more basic question. Where does power come from? And in Michigan, it's 50 to 60% from coal, mined through strip mining in the Powder River Basin of Wyoming and Montana. and a great amount from natural gas mined in shale formations across the country. I'm not going to belabor the points about the impacts of all of these things, because I'm assuming you wouldn't be here if you didn't already have some sense of it. The thing I want to pull out about these two fuel sources is that a lot of the experiences that brought me here have been experiencing the direct impacts of coal extraction and gas extraction in West Virginia and Ohio, and that's largely why I'm so committed to seeing these alternatives catch on. When we were setting up the system to deliver all of this stuff, we built a national network of high-voltage transmission lines. There's about 600,000 miles of this stuff, and it costs $1 million a mile to build. So if anybody's good at math, that's about $600 billion of investment just in the transmission. That's not including all of the power generation plants, all of the local distribution lines, all of the other pieces that make this economy work. This is the biggest economic project in the last century in terms of our national infrastructure. The highway system is integral to making all of this work. This is a huge investment, and in order to make it happen, we made a big deal with the business community. We said, you people with lots of capital are going to invest it in building this system, and in exchange, we are going to give you monopolies. We're going to say that only you can sell power in this specific area, and only you get to capture the profits and wealth from that. Now, some of these entities are actually, workable. We have some municipal utilities that provide power to their residents, and their job is to serve their citizens. We have some rural electric cooperatives whose goal is to provide power to their members. But what most of us deal with are investor-owned energy utilities. And these are the service territories of the two major utilities in Michigan, Consumers and DTE Energy. And the purpose of an investor-owned utility, legally, is to generate value for its shareholders. So the entities that deliver power to over 80% of the people in this country have the explicit legal mission of making money for their shareholders. The actual people getting the power are not the point. And I'd encourage folks who really want to get into this to join me for the workshop I'm doing at 2 p.m. to talk about how this works, but I think we talk a lot about the impacts in terms of the climate and in terms of on our health. We're very clear on those. What we don't talk about a lot is how this structure of power creates poverty in our communities. It extracts wealth even as it extracts resources. And it has a lot to do with the dismantling of our democratic control of how this system works. So if we are ultimately invested in changing where we get our energy, these business models do not work for that. And if we are really interested in changing where we get our power, it is integral that we talk about changing who has it. So we did some very back-of-the-envelope math with a couple utility bills, because it turns out utilities aren't very forthcoming with data. And guessed that Highland Park, this little 3-square-mile city in the center of Detroit, spends about $16 million every year on energy. And almost all of that money is leaving the Highland Park community. So the question we're posing is, what would it look like for Highland Park to keep $16 million in its local economy every year, to reinvest that in local businesses and in people saving energy? And as a result, Soulardarity has taken on a deeper mission statement than just the streetlights, building energy democracy, that is, an energy system we all control, and doing that through community organizing, community education, and community-driven development of clean energy infrastructure. So we are continuing this work with community-owned solar lighting. This is our second streetlight installation at Jacoby Raw Park in Highland Park. One of our partners, Hugh Harris, has been building that up as a space for building a community economy there. And this was a powerful installation for me because it started tying in the streetlights to a deeper vision of what a community-based economy looks like. And in order to start addressing the cost of energy in people's homes, in parallel to the lighting, we have been doing training and offering wholesale weatherization materials to residents to start taking back a little bit of that energy and that financial power that is leaving their homes. And ultimately, we need to go bigger. What we're ultimately talking about is that whole $16 million that is leaving this tiny community that could really use it. What if that was used to put up energy that would power that entire community and neighboring communities around it. These are images of a community-owned solar installation in Minneapolis and a cooperatively owned wind farm in Denmark. And I pull out the wind farm because that is a huge project. That is an offshore wind farm, tens of millions of dollars, and it is 2/3 owned directly by Danish citizens. And I pose this both as an exciting thing and as a challenge, because I think there's a bit of a paradox with living in an economy that the whole reason we're in this mess is because the economy is growing infinitely and thinks that it can grow forever. But we actually have to get to the scale where we can compete with that economy if we are interested in making change on a time scale that matters. So ultimately creating the means to have control of this huge infrastructure by our communities. And the last piece I'll say about our work in particular is that we have shifted from being a small, scrappy project of people trying to just get a couple lights on the ground into a membership organization. We have 25 dues-paying members and are growing that to 100 by the end of the year. And this is intentional because while we are very clear that we are building solutions and we are creating alternatives, if you do that effectively enough, eventually the existing business models react because you start to outcompete them. And it's important at that point to have a base of people committed and supported and part of the movement who can stand up and fight for the things that we've built. I experience in a lot of conversations with people this kind of dichotomy between the solutions-oriented work and the opposition-oriented work. And ultimately, we need both. We can't challenge the status quo if we don't have an idea of what comes next, but we can't build that new thing without challenging the existing institutions. So what we're trying to do with Soulardarity is to both build those solutions and build the power and movement to be able to sustain and support them. The overall place we're in is in a moment of historic transition. Movements have been incredibly successful in shutting down coal plants, in starting to put the pressure on the fossil fuel economy. But our utilities are trying to get us to reinvest in nuclear and natural gas, which are still also getting more expensive and still maintaining that corporate control. So if we're really serious about having a clean energy economy and having one that is locally controlled, we need to organize to get off of this cost curve that's keeping us on the hook for their bad decisions and get on this one that takes us towards a more local, clean, and democratically controlled energy economy. And it needs to happen everywhere at the same time. Like, we have a solution that I feel has been appropriate and powerful in Michigan, but ultimately this needs to happen all over the country all at the same time if we're going to change the way this entire economy works. And I think we can totally do it. It's just going to take a lot of energy. So, let's get started. We have a lot of work to do. I'd encourage you to check us out on solardarity.nationbuilder.com if you want to stay updated, see the new lights we're putting up and the growth of our membership program, and to just stay connected. The thing I want to close with is a piece from an artist called Guante from the Twin Cities. And I get a terrific amount of joy and satisfaction from this work, from connecting with all of you and from building the movement to transform our energy economy. I hope folks who are interested will join me at 2 o'clock to talk more about it. But the distance between where we are and where we need to be is still really big and really scary. So I'm going to share a couple words that I turn to in those moments. It's from a song called Two Young Leaders, which seems appropriate given the theme of what everyone else has been talking about. And I hope a lot of things for the world, but right now I just hope that these words make you feel as powerful as they do for me. What you say is more important than how you say it. What you do is more important than what you say, and what you build is more important than what you do. So what you gonna build today? Young leader, young meta-human, young spellcaster, stay fashioned in the blueprints. Humility is beautiful, but when worst comes to worst, remember what you're worth. Remember, people who have not accomplished half of what you have are gonna tell you that you work too hard. And they'll support your yapping, but when you propose action, they'll tell you that it goes too far. So if you really want change, be prepared to make war, whether physical, spiritual, cultural, or something more, because if we are the ones we've been waiting for, what the hell are we waiting for?